important ritual together. I'm just going to take a moment to step over and grab that joys and sorrows book. This morning, we have a joy for Michael and Kelly Scott. It was wonderful to have 7 student and faculty colleagues with us for Thanksgiving dinner. A joy this morning from Kitty Forbush. My great-nephew Gabriel was born on November 22nd, 8 pounds, 1 ounce, 21 inches, healthy and beautiful. Sending deep love to Gabriel and to parents and to family. Welcoming new family into the world. This morning, we also just lift up the joy of having the 150th anniversary of the Thanksgiving service that our congregation has participated in for these low 150 years. And then we will drop 1 stone into the bowl to represent all of the joys and sorrows left unspoken in the silent sanctuaries of our hearts. May all be held in heart. This morning, we also have a few additional joys and sorrows. A joy to have celebrated in person from Lois Baum and Greg Baum, to celebrate in person with Greg's son, Brad. Also, thrilled to see President Biden sent the 2 pardoned turkeys to Farm Sanctuary in Watkins Glen, with good coverage on Spectrum TV9 of a tour there with other rescued turkeys. Yay. From Lois Baum, our resident vegan. From Beth Ayers, a joy to have celebrated an in-person birthday. So a joy with her that her little horse will be coming home from the hospital at Cornell this evening. And from Eileen Musson, reading all these online joys today is making me feel so joyful, hopeful, and so grateful today. Steve, I hope your wife continues to feel better and stronger every day. We have a sorrow today from Steve Searles, whose wife is not doing well. Continuing to think of you, Steve, and your wife in this time, these ongoing health challenges. May all be held in the heart of love. Today, we will also light a white candle to acknowledge that we are a community that is still affected by the grief, loss, fear, and hope of living through a pandemic. May this candle's flame hold our experiences around this time, this disease, the many ways it has affected our lives. And may its light be a beacon of hope and a reminder that we are not alone. Dear ones, we come here each Sunday to be reminded that we are not alone, to be reminded that we are better when we are together and when we are gathered. So I want to invite you this morning into a time of meditation. Our words this morning are a Sank meditation from the Metta meditation, the loving kindness meditation in the Buddhist tradition. So we will begin singing throughout this meditation, shifting our focus from ourselves to those around us, and expanding our loving kindness to cover the whole world. So please get comfortable in your seats, sit back, rest your shoulders from your ears, take a deep breath. We will begin this morning with focusing inward, with holding ourselves in our mind's and heart's eye. So let's just take a moment this morning to check in with ourselves, to sit with ourselves. How are we feeling? Is there any tension that you're holding on to in your body? How is your spirit? Are there any worries or concerns that are on your hearts this morning? I want to invite you to take a deep breath in and imagine a kind and loving force for good entering your body. Let's take that deep breath in together. And just exhale all of the tension, the worries, the concerns you're holding on to. Let it out. May we be present here, and let us sing to ourselves, may I be filled with loving kindness. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be peaceful and at ease. May I be whole. Let your mind now wander to someone you care about. It could be a spouse, a partner, a child, a loved one, a friend, someone you saw this weekend, someone you were thinking of this weekend, someone you hold affection for and whose well-being you desire. Now hold their face and their name in your mind's eye and in your heart's eye. As we sing to them, may you be filled with loving kindness. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be peaceful and at ease. May you be whole. Let's take a moment to turn our minds to someone we are holding in loving concern this morning. It could be someone you know who is having a hard time, someone who is sick, someone who is living with addiction, someone who you just are holding deep concern for. Maybe they're just going through it. Bring their face and their name into your heart and your mind's eye. Let yourself rest in their image and just hold that deep compassion and care and concern you have for them in your heart. As we sing together, may you be filled with loving kindness. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be peaceful and at ease. May you be whole. And we now turn our hearts to someone with whom we are in conflict, someone we are experiencing tension with. It could be some leftover tensions from the holiday. It could be tensions that pre-existed this holiday. But I want to invite you to bring their face and their name into your mind and heart's eye. Hold this person there with whom you are experiencing conflict. Let us just acknowledge that this is not comfortable. And yet it is our work to do. And so let us hold them in our minds and heart's eye as we sing to them, may you be filled with loving kindness. May you be filled with loving kindness. kindness. May you be well, may you be peaceful and at ease. May you be whole. We shift our attention now to those here in this room and in our virtual sacred worshiping space. We allow our hearts to expand from our homes all the way to First Universalist Church, and from our church all the way to the sacred space of people's homes who are joining us online. We are connected. We are a community. Let us sing together for our community. May we be filled with love and kindness. May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be well. May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be well. May we be peaceful and at ease. May we be whole. We expand from here, from our homes and our church building out to our neighbors, to our greater Rochester community and beyond, to the whole state of New York, expanding our loving kindness further to our whole country, to our whole world, holding all of the creatures and beings on this planet in tender care and loving kindness. Out of the expansive loving kindness we are all now holding in our awareness, let us sing for the final time, may we be filled with loving kindness. May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be well. May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be well. May we be peaceful and at ease. May we be whole. As we just sit in loving kindness for ourselves, for one another, for all of us, let us join in some quiet reflection together. Amen. Our reading this morning is an excerpt from Decolonizing Thanksgiving, which is an article written by Cafe Oloni in 2019. For so many, Thanksgiving represents a time of community, celebration, family, and feasting. Cherished traditions that are somehow tied into a questionable origin story that is far removed from California, where the Ohlone people are. We Ohlonis are often asked how we celebrate Thanksgiving at home, or if we even do. The answer is always complex, but something like this. We celebrate the dinner at home with our loved ones while simultaneously rejecting the colonialism that the day embodies. The common narrative, a mixture of myths with few truths, is that Indigenous communities of present-day New England, primarily the Wampanoag people, share a meal of Thanksgiving with pilgrims from England. Only is the subsequent destruction and harm that pilgrims inflicted on the native communities that fed them, while subsequently seizing Indigenous homelands while working to eradicate Indian cultures, starting to be fully discussed. The undeniable harm that was caused to East Coast Indian communities, and later throughout all of North America, including California via Manifest Destiny, has led to many a question about how to celebrate a holiday that blatantly promotes a story of invasion and colonization, while for generations sanitizing the truth from plain view. How can we share the truths of Thanksgiving without undermining the holiday that is now more associated with family than with imperialism? How can we share a more authentic regional version of how this story has affected us in California, rather than an East Coast heavy narrative that has no direct connection to the Bay Area? How can we rethink what this holiday means so that we can continue to celebrate with our families with laughter and joy, while rejecting the oppression of Indigenous people at the same time? For most Ohlone people at home in California, Thanksgiving dinner is a time to be with our families and spend time together as a community. Most of us work busy jobs, have lives in the modern world within our traditional homeland, and cherish the time we get to spend with our grandparents, parents, aunties, uncles, cousins, and friends. During Thanksgiving dinner, we hardly talk about the origin narrative around the holiday, and instead, we use the gatherings as a time to say what in life we are grateful for, to laugh more than our fair share, and to enjoy an excuse to overeat. We imagine this is common throughout many homes, regardless of ethnicity. We also know that we do not want our story or our struggles ignored or whitewashed as Thanksgiving becomes a common time for the public to think critically about issues of colonization, and the holiday increasingly brings Indigenous issues and people into the center of the seasonal conversation. Therein ends our reading this morning. 2 or 3 years ago, this church began using a land acknowledgement. And I say 2 or 3 years ago because, quite frankly, time is very difficult right now. I think it was about 2 or 3 years ago. We began by printing it in our order of service, acknowledging that the Indigenous people here on whose ancestral lands First Universalist now stands. And I want to actually begin my sermon this morning by telling you a bit of the story behind our land acknowledgement, for those of you who might be wondering. Your communications committee, an able and amazing group of folks, had gone to a workshop or attended some kind of a local gathering and had heard a land acknowledgement, and immediately took to wondering why First Universalist had not adopted this practice. They drafted some words, reached out to local Haudenosaunee leadership, edited their words, and these are what I speak every Sunday. We acknowledge with respect the Seneca Nation, keepers of the Western Door and part of the Haudenosaunee people, on whose ancestral lands First Universalist now stands. It's important that we say this. It's important that we have this land acknowledgement at the beginning of our services. Since then, we have been exploring Indigenous accountability here and there with regular adult faith formation opportunities from our own Reverend Michelle and a few services from myself and our worship leadership team. A few months ago, folks from our church began reaching out to me to say that it doesn't quite feel like enough to just have this land acknowledgement. To say, I don't know, to just acknowledge the Indigenous people who are here in this community isn't actual solidarity. It doesn't actually require that much of those of us sitting here to just recite a land acknowledgement. We don't want this to feel like an empty gesture. Because we know here in our hearts and spirits that an empty gesture is not justice. We know that justice looks like freedom. Freedom to live without threats of genocide. Freedom to wear the colors one wants to grow one's hair in ways that honor their traditions and practices. We know that a justice for Indigenous people is about land and denying access for pipelines that are ripping our earth apart. We know that justice for Indigenous communities is about access to resources and protecting the water. Pardon me. It feels to me right now in our history like a time of reckoning is here. Are some of you feeling that right now? Anybody? Yes? Yes? I'm seeing a few nods. Indigenous accountability is something that must be taken seriously, and it is feeling more and more and more like we are getting there. We are having what we are calling a great unveiling, in the words of Adrienne Marie Brown, around the ways that those of us who occupy settler colonial histories and heritages have continued to occupy these lands and attempt to erase a people and settle here as if this land belonged to us always. We needed to hear the story this morning when we were alone by David A. Robertson because it is a story of how Cree people have survived the horrible mission schooling system, a tool of settler colonialism intentionally used to separate children from their parents, their communities, their language, their practices. When white Christians intentionally told these children that their ways were bad and our ways were good, haircut, language forbidden, refused contact with siblings, only allowed to wear certain colors. And these folks found ways to survive, ways to even thrive and find joy in their lives when they could get away alone for a bit together. Let this weekend not be a time when we tell stories solely of American Indian death, of extinction, of genocide. Yes, there have been attempts, and yes, many have died in the process, and it was a huge loss for our country, for our Indigenous communities, for the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who grew up not knowing who they came from. But we have to remember today, Indigenous peoples are here today. Indigenous communities exist today despite all that settler colonial people and practices have done to attempt to separate those communities from that which is life-giving. We cannot tell stories that end solely with Indigenous death because Haudenosaunee people are still here. When we tell stories solely focused on death, we again erase a people. As Unitarian Universalists, we must reckon with the ways our Christian heritage aligned with white supremacy and the practices of attempted whitewashing. Our origin story in this country so often goes back to its foundings, and yet we would rather tell the stories of triumph than wrestle with the moments when we historically fell short, like what Michael was referring to at the beginning of our service. And what does this history mean for those of us here now? What does this history mean for those of us here who hold marginalized identities? How does that history still live in this space? How are we still in need of healing and amends? I have to tell you this morning, I actually do not know the stories around our direct participation in colonization. I do not know our shared history at First Universalist Church around Indigenous displacement. What I do know is that each and every one of us here, including right here in this church building, lives on stolen land. And the wealth accumulation that has come from coming to these so-called United States and claiming these lands as our own and then using them for our own profits is almost incalculable. That wealth is huge. Where would we be without this building and this land? Where would any of us be without the land we live on and the shelter we seek there? Land is essential to our survival. And yet, how do we reconcile how we have come to be on these lands? It is worth the time and the effort and the attention to learn the stories of our ancestors and to learn the stories of the land, especially if your families have lived here for a long time, especially if you are white and have not taken the time to learn whether to learn whose lands your ancestors came to occupy, whether during the first wave of settler colonialism here or when your European ancestors came here seeking solace from other oppressive countries and regimes. It's worth knowing about which peoples were displaced to make room here for us and whose lands we currently occupy. I wanted to bring in some Indigenous voices this morning from the Ohlone community because I used to spend my Black Friday, every Black Friday, the Friday after Thanksgiving, with the Ohlone folks in West Oakland, California, while I was in seminary there for 3 years. Each year, and I'm sure this happened this past Friday, the Ohlone community hosts a protest and action on Black Friday at a shopping complex in West Oakland, which has been built on top of their historic shell mound. For people unfamiliar, the Ohlone people on the West Coast piled up these huge shell mounds full of shells of the fish they were eating, as well as the bones of their dead. Shell mounds are sacred land. Since colonial occupation in these so-called United States, there is a mall now built on top of this shell mound, preceded by a paint company whose chemicals seeped into the ground and poisoned the remains of the ancestors who were buried in the shell mound. And prior to that, an amusement park had been built around the lands of the shell mound with an elevated dance floor built right on top of the shell mound. The white people who attended these fairs literally danced on top of the graves of the Ohlone people, indigenous to the northwest coast of what we now recognize as California. Each Black Friday, these folks gather to remind people that indigenous communities are still looking to take their land back today, right now. Indigenous communities have not been extinct, no matter how publicly degraded and disrespected historically, continually, indigenous communities have been. And this struggle continues now to this day and will continue into the future, I'm sure. I really want to see some ways that we can plug into some of these struggles here in upstate New York and Western New York. On my way home yesterday, I was coming back from being away in Pennsylvania. I stopped in Shortsville, New York, where I was meeting with friends for an outing. We were actually going to go walk with some reindeer. It was really magical and fantastic. But we began at the Red Jacket Middle School. I arrived a bit early while a middle school basketball game was still going on, and I stepped inside to run into the restroom. And as I walked around for a moment, I suddenly realized I was sitting in yet another school with an American Indian as a mascot. The timing could not have been more poignant. And my heart hurt as I looked around to see the logos, the jerseys, the sports trophies, the hats, the t-shirts, in this town of predominantly white people. What can Indigenous accountability mean for our nation? What does it mean in this small town in rural Western New York? The erasure of Indigenous people behind stereotypes and mascots has been pervasive in our country, still acceptable long after many, though not all, have eradicated other racist caricatures and sports mascots a long time ago. The ways Indigenous people have been viewed and treated in our country in light of these stereotypes is heartbreaking, harmful, repeatedly harmful. One more story. As I'm looking up and researching for the sermon, I quickly type into Google some sort of a question related to Indigenous communities, and an autofill kicks in and fills in to point me towards a search about Indigenous children, especially girls who have gone missing. That was the top search Google believed I was looking for, as I guess so many people have been looking for information on missing Indigenous children. Children who have been taken from their families and whose missing has gone largely uncovered by news media and whose investigations have yet to turn up anything. Indigenous children are still being taken from their families now. I think we just actually need to pause for a second and sit with that together. Attempts at erasure are not solely a thing of the past. Attempts to eradicate a people continue. We cannot let this conversation just come up around this time of year and then release it until we are again reminded by this holiday that Indigenous accountability and solidarity are necessary. It is my hope that we will continue this work throughout this year together, looking at the stories this church has around land displacement, exploring opportunities to partner with Indigenous communities in Rochester, and continuing to do our own work here to learn about this important history and how it informs our present day. May we sit with the deep discomfort of what has been done and what continues to harm human life and living. May we open our hearts and not grow hardened to the hurt and the harm around us. This weekend, may we recognize the history and the legacy of survival of Indigenous people in this country. May we learn our own family's history and take responsibility for it rather than pushing it away as something we did not do. And may we not let this conversation about Indigenous solidarity and accountability end here, but rather continue to bring it up in the days and weeks and months ahead. Let us join in this important work together. Amen. Blessed be, and may it be so. Dear ones, as we come to a time to close our service, we are going to sing together hymn number 170, We Are a Gentle, Angry People, being reminded today that our own anger is important and that how we are with one another is important. So let us rise in body or in spirit and join in singing hymn number 170, We Are a Gentle, Angry People. are singing, singing for our lives. We are gentle, loving people, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are gentle, loving people, and we are singing, singing for our lives. Please remain standing as we extinguish our chalice flame this morning. Let us read together the words printed in your order of service and on the screen. We extinguish this flame, but we keep its light in our hearts with its message of love and justice, taking it outside these walls to the world we live in until we are together again. As we close our service this morning, I will invite you to place a hand over your heart, to take a moment to just look around and see who is here with you, whether in gallery view online or here in person. Let us just connect for just a second. Friends, as we go forth from this space, may we listen to our heart's call for justice, for mourning, for the work that is ahead. May we do the deep work of amends making and accountability, and may we know that we do this work out of the deepest love for one another, for ourselves, and for our community. May you know that you are loved, and may you go and be that love wherever you may go in the week ahead. Amen. Blessed be, and may it be so.
Think about it, there must be higher love down in the heart and in the stars above. Without it, life is wasted time. Look inside of your heart, I'll look inside of mine. Things look so bad everywhere. This whole world, what's fair? We walk blind and we try to see, falling behind in what could be. Bring me a higher love. Bring me a higher love. Bring me a higher love. Where's that higher love I've been thinking of? Worlds are turning and we're just hanging on, facing our fear, standing out there alone. I'm yearning, and it's real for me. There must be someone who's feeling for me. Things look so bad everywhere. In this whole world, what's fair? We walk blind and we try to see, falling behind in what could be. Bring me a higher love. Bring me a higher love. Bring me a higher love. Where's this higher love I've been thinking of? I will wait for it. We're not too late for it. Until then, I'll sing my song to cheer the night along. I could light the night up with my soul on fire. I could make the sun shine with pure desire. Let me feel that love come over me. Let me feel how strong it can be. high